They thought Africa would never rise. They thought we would keep digging in silence while they stole everything. But at exactly 6:00 a.m. the 15th of March, the impossible happened. 7 foreign mining CEOs, the most powerful men behind a $500 billion empire, were arrested, simultaneously, without warning, dragged from their hotel beds. Private jets grounded, airspace sealed, entire borders locked down in one sweep. How did this happen? Who dared to strike back against the colonial system that bled Africa dry for half a century? One name now haunts every boardroom, from Paris to Toronto: Ibrahim Traoré. This is not just a story. This is a reckoning. For decades, Burkina Faso's gold filled European vaults while children died with empty stomachs. Villages were burned for mining rights. 10-year-olds choked underground in toxic shafts while CEOs popped champagne in Swiss resorts. And no one said a word. Until now. This is the true story of how one African leader hunted the untouchables, exposed an empire of lies, and put 500 years of exploitation on trial. It's not fiction, it's history in the making. And by the end of this video, one question will burn in your mind. If he could do it, why can't the rest of Africa? If this makes your blood boil, if this makes you believe again, then like, share, and stay with us. Because the fight isn't over, it's just begun. Have you ever felt your heart shatter from helpless rage, watching our motherland Africa drained of every drop of wealth, watching bone-thin children shiver in rags, stomachs, empty eyes, hollow with hunger? We've endured enough. Share this video for a dream of a free Africa. Like and subscribe to stand for a powerful, united and rising continent. Let the world hear us now. It began before the sun rose. On the 15th of March at exactly 6:00 a.m., the capital city of Ouagadougou held its breath. Across 7 different luxury hotels, doors were kicked open in perfect synchrony. Armed special forces stormed in not to fight terrorists but to detain the men once seen as untouchable, the CEOs of the world's most dominant mining empires. Victor Petro, head of Goldmax Corporation, one of the largest gold companies on earth, was seized in his sleep. His private security detail didn't even have time to react. He was dragged out in pajamas, handcuffed, and taken directly to a maximum security prison. Jean-Claude Dubois, CEO of Western Gold Mining, had been planning to flee. His private jet was already waiting on the runway, but airspace had been shut down, borders sealed. Before he could escape, his convoy was intercepted, and he was detained without a shot fired. Michael Thompson of Pacific Resources wasn't asleep. He was mid-operation transferring assets to offshore accounts in a hotel boardroom. When agents burst in, his laptop was still open, flashing bank credentials. It became court evidence. This wasn't chaos. It was precision. For months, Ibrahim Traoré and his team operated in silence. They analyzed financial records, placed informants in mining zones, tracked executives' every move, and prepared airtight legal charges. The arrests were not just symbolic, they were strategic. A calculated dismantling of an empire that had looted the nation for decades. These CEOs thought Burkina Faso was just another poor country. They never expected this level of coordination. They never imagined Africa would fight back with law, intelligence, and unshakable resolve. What happened that morning wasn't just justice, it was prophecy. Africa Rising is no longer a slogan. That morning it became real. What Traoré's team uncovered wasn't just corruption, it was industrialized theft. A gold-plated lie built over 5 decades and hidden in plain sight. The investigation started quietly. It began with dusty ledgers, export logs, and inconsistent production reports. Traoré brought in forensic accountants and satellite imaging analysts. Drones flew silently over mining sites, capturing data far more honest than what the CEOs submitted to Burkina Faso's tax office. The results were devastating. The total value of gold extracted from Burkina Faso over 50 years had reached nearly $500 billion, but only $10 billion had ever entered the country's treasury. That's just 2%. The rest hidden, laundered, lost into offshore accounts, European vaults, and secret bank holdings in tax havens. Some companies underreported up to 90% of their output. Goldmax Corporation, for example, was extracting 10 tons of gold per day, yet officially declaring just 1. The other 9 tons vanished every day without a trace in the books. Western Gold Mining used fake invoices, They reported selling gold worth $60.000 for just $10.000 per kilogram. The missing $50.000 per kilo quietly slipped into shell companies across the Caribbean and Switzerland. But Pacific Resources went even further. They faked labor costs. On paper, workers were paid 10 times more than in reality. The inflated salaries were claimed as tax deductions. The excess cash redirected straight to executive bonuses and bribery funds. The deeper Traoré's experts dug, the darker the picture became. This wasn't just exploitation. It was an economic war waged in silence, signed in contracts and sealed by corrupted politicians. But the most damning evidence came not from spreadsheets, but from people. Local miners testified how they were forced to work in unsafe tunnels with no protective gear. Doctors confirmed cases of lung disease, cancer, and chronic infections, all linked to chemical exposure. Villagers described rivers turned black with waste. Their farmland poisoned, their children sick. One witness said, "They took the gold. They left the graves." This wasn't just corporate greed. This was a crime against an entire nation. And while Western media stayed silent and global institutions turned a blind eye, Africa was watching. And under Ibrahim Traoré, Africa was rising. Traoré's investigation didn't stop at the corporations. Because the truth was even more bitter, the looting had help from the inside. Buried in confidential documents and encrypted emails were trails of cash contracts and betrayal. What emerged was a shocking alliance between foreign companies and Burkina Faso's own leaders, men sworn to protect the nation, who instead sold it piece by piece. In 2015, Mark Carber, the then Minister of Energy, accepted a $50 million bribe from Goldmax Corporation. In exchange, the company's corporate tax rate was quietly reduced from 30% to just 3%. That single backroom deal robbed the country of over $2 billion in revenue every year. But it didn't stop there. In 2017, Western Gold Mining paid $100 million to Francois Caboret, brother of then-President Rochmark, Christian Caboret. His reward, 3 exclusive mining licenses granted over lands where 50,000 villagers lived, farmed and buried their ancestors. No environmental assessments, no relocation plans. Just eviction orders backed by bulldozers and silence. And the people given nothing. One woman stood in court and whispered through tears, "They gave us $100 to leave everything behind, to walk away from our land, our dead, our lives." These weren't isolated incidents. They were a system. A system built on betrayal, sustained by silence, and hidden behind suits and state dinners. Traoré didn't just call it corruption. He called it treason. And he made a vow: no deal made in the shadows will survive the light. Not anymore. Not in this Africa. As he prepared his legal team for court, Traoré wasn't just hunting CEOs. He was cleaning house. Because Africa rising cannot be built on a foundation of rot. The world watched in disbelief. Inside a courtroom, in Ouagadougou, the unthinkable was happening. Not in The Hague, not in Paris, but in the heart of Africa. Justice was being served, not in whispers, but in thunder. Ibrahim Traoré did not hide in an office. He walked into that courtroom every day. He stood beside his people, not above them. He looked the accused in the eyes, not through a screen. A special tribunal was formed. 7 judges, 3 from Africa, 2 from Asia, 2 from Latin America. No Western powers, no colonial fingerprints, only fairness, only truth. The lead prosecutor stood voice steady and read the charges. Victor Petro, CEO of Goldmax Corporation, faced 234 counts. Tax evasion, environmental destruction, forced displacement, bribery, theft on a national scale. Jean-Claude Dubois of Western Gold Mining faced 189 charges. The most horrifying among them, proven without a doubt, was the use of child labor. Children as young as 12 forced to work underground. 16-hour shifts, no sunlight, no safety. Most never lived past 15. Michael Thompson of Pacific Resources was charged with mass poisoning. His company had dumped cyanide waste into rivers. 3 major water sources were contaminated. Cancer rates had exploded in 17 villages. Over 2,000 lives were lost. Victims came forward. Their voices shook the room. A young man named Musa, now 23, spoke while gasping for breath. He had started working in a mine at the age of 8. "They stole my childhood," he said. "They stole my lungs, my future." An elderly woman, Miriam, stood with a scarf wrapped around her head. "Our village was erased," she said. "Our ancestors were buried on that land, and they gave us $100 to leave." The courtroom fell silent, but not from fear, from power. The silence of truth. This trial was not just about 7 men. It was about 5 centuries of silence, 5 centuries of exploitation. And finally someone had said, "Number, Africa is not for sale." Traoré did not speak often, but when he did, the room listened. "This is not just Burkina Faso's case," he said. "This is Africa's case. If we win here, others will rise." And indeed they were watching, because this time Africa was not begging, Africa was judging, and justice was just beginning. 6 months after the arrests, the verdict was announced. The courtroom was silent, but outside the nation held its breath. Guilty, every single one. Victor Petro of Goldmax Corporation was sentenced to 50 years in prison. He was fined $10 billion. All personal assets were seized. His villas, his yachts, his private jet, even his art collection. Jean-Claude Dubois of Western Gold Mining received 45 years, $8 billion in fines. His bail offer of $1 billion was rejected with laughter. Michael Thompson of Pacific Resources was sentenced to life in prison. His crime was not just theft, it was death. Thousands poisoned, rivers destroyed, villages gone. Other executives were sentenced as well. Robert Mackenzie of Continental Gold, 40 years. James Harrison of African Minerals, 55 years. Peter Williams of Global Mining Co-op, 60 years. David Anderson of Summit Resources, life without parole. But the court did not stop there. In a groundbreaking move, it ruled that all proceeds from the sale of their assets would be given directly to the victims and their families, not to a government, not to a fund, but to the people who had suffered, lost and endured. The world was stunned. Western governments condemned the verdict. The European Union called Traoré a dictator. The United States threatened sanctions. France warned, "You will pay for this." Traoré replied calmly, "Which aid are you threatening to cut? The 100 million you send us each year. We will earn 10 billion annually from our gold mines alone. Keep your aid. Give it to your puppet states." Around the world, stock markets shook. Goldmax shares crashed. Western gold teetered on collapse. And across Africa, a new wind blew. This was more than punishment. This was a message. Africa had risen, and the world for the first time was forced to listen. What happened in Burkina Faso did not stay in Burkina Faso. Just weeks after the verdict, the ripple turned into a wave. In Mali, 5 mining CEOs were arrested. In Guinea, entire bauxite fields were nationalized. In Niger, uranium contracts with foreign firms were torn up overnight. Leaders across the Sahel began quoting Traoré in speeches. "Africa is not poor. Africa is being looted." The message was clear. The time of silence was over. The streets of Ouagadougou overflowed with celebration. Drums echoed. Children danced. Elders cried in disbelief. This was the justice they had been denied for generations. But the shock was greatest in Western capitals. Meetings were held behind closed doors. Emergency sessions in Brussels, Washington, and Paris. How could this small country shake the global order? Traoré had an answer. "We are not enemies to anyone. Our door is open to real partners. But if you come to exploit, come to steal, come to deceive, then leave." The world called it rebellion. Africa called it resurrection. This was not just a trial. It was a turning point. And across the continent, a new voice was rising. Africa was no longer begging for dignity. Africa was claiming it. Africa rising not as a slogan but as a lived reality. When Ibrahim Traoré stepped out of the courtroom for the final time, he did not raise a fist. He raised a folder. Inside were the names, the signatures, the proof of 500 years of theft, and the verdict that changed history. Today, he said, "We did not just try 7 men. We put an entire system on trial. And for the first time, Africa won." But he did not stop there. The government of Burkina Faso seized all remaining mining assets. A new state-owned company was formed, the Burkina National Mining Corporation. 70% of its revenue was dedicated to education, healthcare, and infrastructure. And the results were immediate. 500 new schools were built. 200 hospitals opened their doors. Over 5,000 kilometers of paved roads connected forgotten villages. Electricity reached 2,000 communities that had lived in darkness for generations. 3 million people gained access to clean drinking water. In mining towns once filled with despair, life began again. The minimum wage rose from $50 to $500 a month. Workplace safety matched European standards. Fatal accidents dropped to zero. Children no longer worked in mines. They studied in fully funded technical universities, learning to become engineers, geologists, chemists, the very future of their own land. Africa was no longer being drained. Africa was building. The movement spread. In Latin America, in Southeast Asia, in every place once called a colony, people stood taller. Flags were raised. Laws were rewritten. The silence was broken. Africa rising was no longer an idea. It was a fact. And it was not built on aid. It was not gifted by foreign hands. It was earned by courage, by sacrifice, by truth. So now we ask you, have you ever felt your heart break from rage and hope all at once? When you see children no longer starving but singing. When you see mothers no longer burying but building. Share this video. Let the world know what justice looks like when Africa stands. Subscribe, comment, be part of this journey, because this is not the end. This is only the beginning. And may God bless and protect Africa, a land of resilience, of dignity, and of unstoppable strength. I watched the video with tears in my eyes, not just because of what I saw, but because of what I remembered. The faces of children I knew, thin, hollow-eyed, too weak to cry. The dry rivers where we once drank. The silence of fathers who could no longer feed their families. That was our reality. That was the price of silence. For too long we lived under a shadow. We were told we were poor, incapable, dependent, but they never said why. They never told us that our wealth built their cities, that our gold, our soil, our labor made their luxury possible. We were taught to work hard but never to ask questions. And when we did, we were told, this is just how the world works. But no longer. When I saw President Ibrahim Traoré standing in that courtroom, standing tall not just for Burkina Faso but for all of us, I felt something awaken. A fire that has long burned beneath the surface. A voice that has long been silenced. This is what Africa rising truly means. Not just development, but dignity. Not just growth, but justice. This was more than a trial. This was a mirror held up to our past and a window into our future. The sentences, the asset seizures, the creation of a national mining corporation. These are not just policies. They are the seeds of a new Africa. One where we no longer wait for aid but invest in ourselves. One where children learn engineering, not just survival. I am part of this Africa reborn. And it is not perfect. We still have wounds, divisions, struggles. But we are no longer ashamed. We are no longer afraid to say this land is ours. These resources are ours. Our future will no longer be signed away by corrupt hands in foreign hotels. We must learn from this. Study the strategies Traoré used. Teach our youth the laws, the numbers, the language of contracts. We must become not just strong in spirit but sharp in knowledge. Because this new Africa must not only rise, it must endure. My heart breaks when I think of the lives lost, the children buried, the dreams crushed. But my heart also rises when I see roads being paved, schools being built, hospitals opening their doors. That is Africa rising. Not in speeches, but in the soil. To every African watching this, hear me, this is your fight too. You don't need to be president. You just need to care. Share the truth. Teach it. Live it. Because the world will not give us justice. We must claim it. This is the dawn of a new Africa. This is Africa reborn. And this, my brothers and sisters, is the roar of Africa rising.